Hey everyone, my guest today is Barry Loudermilk. Barry is a U.S. congressman from Georgia, a veteran of the United States Air Force, and the son of a World War II veteran who holds a deep dedication to God and country. Barry is a nationally published, best-selling author, speaker, public servant, and historian. As a student of the Constitution and the biblical influence on the founding of America, Barry is a trusted authority on American history, conservative policy, national security, and government reform, and has been featured on numerous nationally recognized television and print media outlets. Representative Loudermilk has served in the U.S. House of Representatives since 2015, representing portions of Northwest Georgia. During his time in public service, Barry has been identified as one of the foremost conservative leaders in the House and named one of the most influential leaders in Georgia. In Congress, Barry has served on a special task force for countering terrorism and, more recently, led one of the most consequential and high-profile congressional investigations in modern history, uncovering government corruption and cover-ups. Barry is a stalwart defender of truth, faith, and the Constitution. He has been the target of assassins, survived a domestic terrorist attack, a nearly tragic train crash, a nearly fatal car crash, and was the target of a politically biased false accusation that threatened not only his safety but also the safety of his family. Barry loves spending time with his family and enjoys traveling, hiking, woodworking, hunting, and most any activity in the great outdoors. Welcome to the show, Representative Loudermilk. I want to thank you for being here today. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're working on?
Well, I appreciate it. It's good to be on your show. It's I call myself an ordinary person who has lived an extraordinary life. Um, I grew up in low income housing south of Atlanta. To My father was a World War II veteran, and this amazes a lot of people that they say you're not old enough for your dad to be a World War II veteran. I was at the
Yeah.
very end of the baby boomers, the
Okay.
very tail end. My dad was in his late 40s when I was born, so the majority of my friends, it was their grandfathers that served in World War II, but always won the bragging rights because it was my dad. Um,
Yeah.
but because of that, um, even though we grew up in relative, yeah, most people would consider it poverty or poor. We never knew we
Mm.
were, because I think poverty is a state of mind more than it is a state of finances. And but I grew up with a deep appreciation of American history. And
Mm.
my dad was always telling me stories of American history, not only his experiences in World War II, but more importantly, others, as well as things he learned growing up that, quite frankly, I was
Yeah.
not hearing these stories in public school. And so as I got older, my wife and I decided to homeschool our children. I was living in Alaska at the time we first had our children. I was in the military, so we were moving a lot, so homeschooling made sense. And so
Mm.
I started researching a lot of these stories of America's founding and miracles that happened throughout our history. And so if I'm going to teach those, I want to know more about them. I want to know that they're factual. And so
Yeah.
as I started doing more research and learning more about these stories later on after 9/11 happened, I knew that there was this new sense of patriotism that had swept across America, and people were really interested more in our history. So I started sharing these stories, and people started asking me, "Where can we find out more? Where can we read about these?" And I couldn't
Hmm.
find any books that were about these particular stories. Now, if you go back to the American Revolution, you'll find several stories about God's providence throughout our history because uh, our founding fathers talked about it. Benjamin Franklin talks
Yeah.
about it in the Constitutional Convention. George Washington talked about it quite often. In fact, the first act as George Washington as president was to establish a national day of thanksgiving and prayer for the divine acts of providence that were experienced during our war for independence. Um, but there were no books are about the continuation of these acts of providence, which were happening all the way into
Yeah.
the 20th century that were well documented. So I started writing a book. I've got more than 10 years of research in it in this book. But
Uh,
my going back to my childhood, um, I ended up moving to Alaska after graduating high school to work construction for the summer. At church, I ended up meeting a young lady. We started
Mhm.
dating. We now been married 40 plus years. I think
Yeah.
43. Don't quote me. If I got it wrong, I'm in trouble. But yeah, I think this year's our, yeah, it is our 43rd anniversary.
Okay.
But we, at that point in my time, I had really no ambition other than just to work and make a living. I worked in a furniture factory, and the only reason I was working there is because I work construction. Most of the time I
Yeah.
was in Alaska, but it's a whole lot nicer to work inside when it's 43 degrees below zero than
Oh, yeah.
outside, you know. So,
Yeah.
but God started a transition in my life because He had
Mhm.
something extraordinarily planned for me, which is, at least to this point, of serving in Congress.
Yeah.
No one at all would have ever expected that knew me when I was a child that I would fly on Air Force One with the president, have personal meetings with the president in the Oval
Yeah.
Office, lead one of the most historic and consequential investigations in congressional history. That's just not
Mhm.
me. And that's why I say I'm an ordinary man that lived an
Yeah.
extraordinary life. And and people ask me, why is your first book not about yourself? And I say, well, that's what everybody expects out of politicians, right? But I
Right.
think what's more
Yeah.
important is people understand their history and where they came from.
Yeah. Yeah. I always love to hear about people in politics that have a background that's different or not even different. It's different from other politicians, but like your everyday person, and especially if you have struggles because it shows that you really understand how other people feel when they're struggling.
Right.
I think you can make better decisions to help your constituents when you can connect with them on that level.
Well, that's what the founders
So,
intended. And we've gotten away from that a lot of times, and there's a lot that Congress is doing still that
yeah.
tends to keep the average American from serving in Congress. Just the expense of living in D.C. is one of those
Mhm.
things. We have, you have to maintain two households, one at home and then one
Right.
in Washington. And just the where we are in the country right now, how divided we are. I mean, death threats against members of
Yeah.
Congress are tenfold, have increased tenfold just since I've been in Congress. They're higher than they've
Mhm.
ever been. And so, the founders intended people who worked and lived within the community would go and represent the values of that community in Congress and the interests of that
Yeah.
community. And it's turned into something different than what the founders intended, but I think there's a path to bring it back. And part of that is the
Yeah.
reason I wrote the book and then they prayed is to reunite Americans with their true heritage and really what the founders intended.
Yeah. Yeah, it does it feels like there's this undercurrent of real patriots that are starting to get they just love America, and
Yeah,
there's that feeling of we need to kind of get back, get our country back to where it once was. I, yeah, it seems like it's a tough battle right now though.
it is. It used to be years ago, we've always had two dominant parties in the
Mhm.
nation, Republicans and Democrats. A couple of decades ago, there wasn't that much difference between the two parties in what the end goal was, what they wanted for the
Yeah.
country. It was different paths to get there. That isn't the case anymore. I mean, when you look
Yeah.
at the different ideologies, as we have one side on the Democrat side, and I've got friends that are over there that disagree with where their party's going, but they have learned you don't stand up against the establishment
Mhm.
there, or you'll get crushed politically. But
Yeah.
they are looking more at a socialist society,
Yeah.
whereas, and we've fought some populism movements within the Republican Party as well, but for the most part, most of my colleagues, the
Mhm.
constitutional conservatives on our side, still believe in less government, more freedom, and free market capitalism, all the things that has made America great. And you
Yeah.
don't get to that by more government; you get it by less government. But the
Yeah.
difference now has to the point where it's actually violent between the two parties. So there has to be some drastic
Yeah.
change.
It so to me, it seems like the Democrats just hate America and everything that our country stands for. Is that true? Is that kind of what it's like in there in the
That's
field?
I would say that is the direction that the Democrat Party as a whole is going. Not every
Mhm.
Democrat believes that.
Right.
And this is an issue I have with some colleagues of mine that I'm very friendly with.
Mhm.
There are some that I see sitting reading their Bible uh, quite often, but yet they're not voting those values and
Yeah.
principles that they're reading about. And some I've traveled with. I talk with regularly, and I know they don't believe the radical ideology that's being pushed, but yet there is a greater fear of not getting reelected than
Mhm.
there is the will to stand for what you really believe in. And I think that's
Yeah.
really the detriment of our society is at least on the left, they're all just like lemmings, right? They're
Yeah.
just following right off
Yeah.
the cliff instead of somebody saying, "Stop." No, this is not what we always stood for. John F. Kennedy would be
Uh-huh.
considered a radical right person by
Right.
these days by the standards of the left.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting to see how it's changed, and, a lot of people that aren't on the left anymore, it's that common concept where it's like, I didn't leave the Democrat Party, they left
Right.
me because they just keep moving to the other direction. Do you think that some of this and the violence towards the right has is what has caused a lot of people to not seek reelection?
I think it is. It's a culmination
Uh-huh.
of things. Now, with me, I've decided to retire at the end of this year, but I've been there for 12 years. I've never believed this
Yeah,
as a career. And also, I want to continue the fight for the same
yeah.
things that I have stood for all along. And what's interesting is you're not even supposed to use the word fight anymore, right? Those are
Right,
trigger
right.
words these days. But I mean, fight isn't always physical. There's
Mhm.
intellectual battles. There's battles that you of what you believe in, and debating is
Yeah,
a form of fighting, right? Um,
yeah.
but I want to continue to fight for those things. But one of the
Mhm.
things I'm experiencing right now are there's so many restrictions put on members of Congress that it really throttles what you can do outside the walls of the Capitol. Basically,
Yeah,
you're limited to what you can vote on, how you're going to vote, influencing others. There's some things that I've done, and I felt I've done very effectively there.
yeah.
But it's the connecting with people that is what's really important because this nation is not going to be changed by Washington, D.C. It's going to be changed
Mhm.
by the people. And engagement with the people is what is so important right now, helping people understand their government, helping them understand their own freedom and the limits
Mhm.
that the Constitution places on government. And so there's even since I've been in Congress, there's greater restrictions being placed on members of Congress of what they can and cannot do
Yeah,
inside the Capitol and out. I mean, for instance, if you want to write a book, now I self-published this book, even though it's become a
yeah.
national bestseller. I self-published it because that's the only thing I could do as a member of Congress. I could not go into a contract with a publisher without uh, congressional attorneys approving that and putting limits on what you can do, what you can say.
Y
And
yeah,
you're seeing more and more people feeling that constraint. Some, like myself, look, it's not supposed to be a career. I've done 12 years, which is about the
right.
average for conservatives. It's time to pass it along. And others, and I hate to say this because when people look at the perks of being in Congress, there's really not that many, but a lot of
Uh-huh.
people are finding it unaffordable now. And when you look, I mean, it's public that a member of Congress makes $174,000 a year. Now that
Yeah,
sounds like a lot, and it is a lot until you consider that you have to maintain a house in Washington D.C. and a home where you live, and some members just cannot afford it anymore. And it's
yeah,
it's just the fact of inflation. Congress is never going to vote itself another pay raise. I mean, it's just politically
yeah,
not going to happen. But the one thing that Congress is doing to itself is it's been denying itself a cost of living adjustment where the rest of the federal government gets it. And it's because, I mean,
right.
people understand you're going to, you'll probably lose an election if you vote a pay raise at all. But
Right.
again, that's not why I'm leaving, but that's why I know a lot of, probably about half of them are. It's the affordability, and it's just not worth going through the stress and pressures of your family being threatened and you being threatened,
Yeah.
and um, and just the frustration of dealing in government these days. So
Right.
I think that you've got the culmination of those that are frustrated, those that just can't afford it, and then those just like, hey, the founders didn't intend on this being a career, and
Mhm.
it's time to move on and do other things.
Yeah. Yeah, when you break it down too with the 174,000, like you said, it's supposed to cover housing in both states and then or in DC and the state you represent. That also involves your family,
Mhm.
and you can have people say, "Oh, well," because I have had someone suggest like just government housing, like an apartment for y'all
Yeah,
to live in, and it's like, "Okay, but what are they supposed to do with their families?"
right,
And you don't want people flying back and forth all the time because that's also a cost on on
right.
the taxpayers. So it really does put you in a interesting situation. And then this is something a female, of course, would notice, but the your clothes, your appearance, there's money involved
There
in
is.
that. There's teams involved in all of that. So yeah, there's a lot more into it, but is also like you were saying, the kind of the same thing. There's a lot more into getting things done in DC than people would think. Like to me, it makes me think of just wading through mud to get stuff
Yeah.
done. Like everything you guys are trying to do, there are all these restraints, and it's not like that. You can't just pass something like that, and I think a lot of people believe that.
Right. I mean, people tell me all the time, "Why don't you guys just do this?" And I'm like, "You really don't understand the way government works, right? I've got to have
Yeah.
217 of my friends there, or not my friend. I got to have 217 other people in Congress to go with me to even get it passed out of the House." I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. I worked on a bill for 6 years that was not
Uh-huh.
controversial at all. No one opposed it. Republicans, Democrats, they all thought it was a great idea. It took me 6 years to get it done. It was a simple. It didn't cost the government any money. It was just
Mhm.
transferring a piece of property that a county here in Georgia owned that was part of a Civil War battlefield. They wanted to transfer that
Okay.
property to the Park Service so it could, and it was adjacent to the battlefield, and so they just wanted to
Yeah.
transfer it so it could be part of it, become preserved, so it wouldn't be developed and that type of thing. The Park Service
Yeah.
wanted it. The county wanted to give it to them. It wasn't going to cost any money. It took me 6 years to get it done. I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy. So,
Yeah.
and
It's
that's the thing is, and even in camp when I first campaigned for Congress in 2014, I remember I
mhm.
was in a debate, and there was a former member of Congress who was running to get back in Congress, and there were probably six other people also running. And this was during the
Yeah.
Obamacare fight. And I was a small business owner who had been terribly affected by
Yeah.
Obamacare. I mean, the cost of healthcare for my business just skyrocketed, and the
Mhm.
coverage was less. I mean, I really understood how bad that was. But everyone else
Yeah.
on stage, they said, "What are you going to do when you get into Congress about Obamacare?" And I mean, they were all like, "We're going to get rid of it. I promise you, I'll destroy it." And one said, "I will rip it up, shred it, burn it, and cast its
Yeah.
ashes into the sea." When they got to me, I said, "All of that sounds good, but I can't do anything about it. I have to have
Yeah.
217 of my colleagues join me. You've got to have 60 votes in the Senate, and you've got to have a president that is willing to sign it." And Obama was president at the time. And I said, and I can promise you, Obama is not going to sign a bill that gets rid of his legacy,
Right.
Obamacare. So I'm going to fight as long as I'm there to try to basically take healthcare out of the federal government's hands. It should never be there. But
Yeah.
that's but that red meat campaign of what I'm going to do sounds good. It helps people get elected, but when they get there and they don't get it done, people are saying, "But you promised." And I think that's another thing that we have to get back to is
Mhm.
integrity in your campaign of, "Look, this is what I'm going to fight for, but the only way I'm
Yeah.
going to get this done is if I can get others to join with me and have the support of the people back home being very vocal about it."
Right. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna switch topics here quick if you're okay.
Yeah.
I want to know about the January 6th and your involvement with everything related to that.
Well, that's quite a bit. That's probably going to be another book coming out in the
Yeah.
near future. But
Yeah.
uh, look, I was caught up into the January 6th fiasco afterwards.
Mhm.
I was one of those that were falsely accused as a sitting member of Congress, and we're getting more out of it right now. Is that there was probably, it appears, an expansion of some of the Department of Justice probes, like we've seen with Arctic Frost
Mhm.
and others, that they were actually targeting some members of Congress. And so we're
Yeah.
continuing that investigation. But I was accused of giving reconnaissance tours to insurrectionists the day before. The issue that never
Oh.
came out of that false accusation was none of the people that were my guests. And these are people I met at a church that had never been to Washington, D.C., so they came up to hear the
Yeah.
president speak. And we had told them we'd go to lunch with them, but because of COVID, all the restaurants were closed. Well, they came to my
Right.
office to visit, which was open. The only thing closed was the Capitol itself because of COVID restrictions.
Yeah.
They and some of their guests came to my office. I took them to lunch in the public cafeteria in the House office buildings and showed them a couple of displays in the office buildings. They never went to the Capitol. And none of them even got close to the Capitol during the riots that happened the next day. But it
Right.
was a convenient story. And I felt totally betrayed by some of my colleagues who were on the January 6th committee. And
Yeah.
so they made an accusation that I gave these reconnaissance tours. The interesting thing is, the way they did this is they wrote a letter to me asking me to come testify, but they sent the
Okay.
letter to CNN and MSNBC. They didn't send it to me. I found out about it when it hit the news. Got 200 death
Yeah.
threats right afterwards. Anyhow, one thing I knew they didn't have was evidence because it never happened, right? So I
Yeah.
challenged them to come forward with their evidence. They went quiet, and I thought, okay, it's over with. I've called their bluff. Then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, a couple weeks after that, they come out with video evidence that was heavily edited to look suspicious,
Oh.
right? I mean, they totally just edited and narrated all of this video footage. Uh, but if you watched it and you listened to what they were telling you to say, you could make it. People started saying this does sound really strange.
Mhm.
But I went to the Capitol Police and I said, "Will you analyze all of this video footage?" Now, I served on the committee
Yeah.
that oversaw the security of the Capitol, so I had access to all this video footage. One
Okay.
thing I knew is no Republicans gave any tours of the Capitol, and that's what they were claiming is I gave tours of the Capitol to these people that were bad people, and they
Okay.
weren't even part of the folks that came into the Capitol or even got close to the Capitol. But the
Yeah.
Capitol Police analyzed all the footage and basically came out and said, "Look, hey, there's nothing even suspicious about these people." There were lots of people visiting too. So
Yeah.
it was an act of political retribution by the Select Committee on January 6th because I was very vocal about the way they were handling their investigation. And
Right.
so, anyhow, uh, they continued on with their investigation. I was still critical of it. Then, when Republicans took control in
Mhm.
January 2023, Speaker Kevin McCarthy asked me if I would lead a committee to investigate the investigators. And I
Yeah.
told him, I said, "Look, this is the elephant in the room here, right? They're going to come and say all
Yeah.
he's doing is trying to clear himself." He said, "Well, that's what the first thing I want you to do, because you know what they did to you. All
Yeah.
right. And you go figure out what they did. You're going to know what they did to everyone else." And so
Yeah.
we went in. I had a whole team that was given this committee and had attorneys and investigators. And when they handed over the documents, what we thought it was supposed to be all the documents of January 6th Select Committee, we found out that
Yeah.
there were several documents that were not preserved. But they did find all the
Mhm.
documents where they had investigated all the people that visited my office that day. And what
Uh-huh.
was amazing was how in depth they investigated these people. I mean, they subpoenaed them, they took their phones, their videos, emails, all kind of stuff. But they
Yeah.
found out there was nothing to it an entire month before they made the accusation against me. I mean, they knew it was, and I had interviewed
Yeah.
an informant who was in the room when they made the decision, and he told me, um, he said, "Look, I was there. All the attorneys on the select committee, investigators were saying, "Do not do this.
Mhm.
There's no evidence. There's nothing to this." But they decided to do it because they needed political retribution. So
Yeah.
we started the investigation. Found out very quickly there was a lot of missing documents. That President
Yeah.
Trump will talk about destroyed documents. There were some, I can't say they're destroyed. We just hadn't found them yet. There's
Okay.
terabytes of video data that does not exist as far as we can tell. So we assume they're destroyed. But initially, we
Yeah.
found that there was a lot of missing documents. We found where the committee. Now these are documents that belong to the House of Representatives, right? It was their
Uh-huh.
investigation. Um, they were sent to the White House for archiving. That is
Didn't
not
make.
kosher at all, right? Um,
Yeah.
one of the reasons you do that is because the president can claim executive privilege to keep public and Congress from seeing them. Some documents were sent
Okay.
to Home Department of Homeland Security. So this is when Biden was president, and so we spent a
Yeah.
lot of time trying to get those documents. We also we were given several hard drives that were used by the committee. Um, I hired a forensics team to go in and
Uh-huh.
do a low level search of all these. We found over 10,000 deleted documents. Now, uh, a lot of those they were benign. I mean, they were just duplicates of other
Okay.
documents, but we did find almost 200 that were unique, and several were password protected that we weren't able to get into. But our persistence with the
Okay.
team, we started uncovering these documents that were sent other places. We'd also found other documents that had been encrypted, and once we got into them, uh, there was an interesting pattern. Is all the documents
Mhm.
that were sent other places or not preserved uh, contradicted the narrative of the Select Committee on January 6th, which is the Republicans
Yeah.
planned this, the Trump administration was behind it. Look, I've never been a January 6th denier. There was violence that day, right? There's
Right.
no question about it. But my
Right.
question has always been, regardless of who it was, how were they able to get in, right? And
Yeah.
how what happened to the security at the Capitol that they so easily breached? No one was addressing that. Um,
Right.
but if you just point your finger politically at someone and you don't go after the truth, you're never going to fix the problem. So it's susceptible to happen again. But the deeper we got,
Yeah.
the more we found out that there was as much of a cover up as there was conspiracy. So um,
Yeah.
it basically there. My opinion now, because the investigation is still going on. Under in this
Yeah.
Congress, we've recreated the committee. I'm now working as a select subcommittee under Judiciary, is given a little more authority. I now have direct subpoena power.
Okay.
But what my assessment a year ago is the same today. A lot of people knew this was coming. I mean, we've uncovered that the FBI had solid intelligence. Not only that it
Mhm.
was going to be bad, it should have been worse based on the intelligence they had. We do
Yeah.
know other entities had intelligence this was coming, but no one seemed to do anything to stop it. We also know that
Yeah.
President Trump did order the National Guard to be deployed. He did that on January the 3rd,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
We uncovered that by General Milley's own testimony. Uh, we, but we also know that the National Guard was ready on January 6th in the riot gear, ready to deploy, but they were held back by the
Oh.
Pentagon. Even after the approval was
Oh.
made to deploy them, they were withheld for about 3 hours because they didn't like the optics of National Guard being there. In fact, I had one Pentagon official say, "Well, we didn't want to be to appear to be assisting in an insurrection." And I had to correct him. I said, "Well, if you believe this was an act of insurrection by withholding the troops from going to help stop it, that's what you actually did." So, all in all,
Yeah.
what we've uncovered, and there's still a lot of work to be done, is that a
Yeah.
lot of people, a lot of agencies, government agencies, knew that this was coming, but they did nothing to stop it or to have the chief of Capitol Police was not made aware of the level of violence that was likely to occur.
Yeah. And what was Nancy Pelosi's deal with this? Did she also call off the guards, or what was that
So
about?
we're
That
still looking into. We know that
okay.
now the chief of Capitol Police. will make the request for the National Guard. So you have the Constitution, separation of powers, right? That
Uh-huh.
if you the National Guard, which is controlled by the executive branch, um, the president just can't send the National Guard. If he could,
Yeah.
he could send troops over to take over Congress if he didn't like what they were doing. So he
Yeah.
doesn't have constitutional authority.
Yeah.
But the National Guard can be sent if requested by Congress. And that process
Okay.
is the chief of Capitol Police will make the request to what's known as the Capitol Police Board. So each
Okay.
house of Congress, Senate and House, both have sergeant at arms, and they're responsible for each chamber's security. And
Yeah.
so you have two sergeant at arms, then you have the architect of the Capitol who is responsible for the uh, physical part of the Capitol, right? The security of the doors and all this. So those are the three
Yeah.
members of the board. They have to vote to approve National Guard to come. The chief of police, starting I think on January the 4th, made multiple requests for National Guard assistance, and they were all denied. We do know that Nancy Pelosi's office was involved with the House Sergeant at Arms, pretty much saying, no, we don't like the optics. It wasn't
Okay.
until the Capitol was already breached that they changed their mind and said, okay, now we can request the National Guard. So that's when the request was made. But yet, that's when the Pentagon delayed the deployment of the National Guard for 3.5 hours,
Okay.
even though they were in the
Oh man.
armory ready to go as of early as 6 o'clock in the morning.
Oh
So,
wow.
yeah, Pelosi was involved in, at least her office was involved
Mhm.
in disapproving the earlier request for the National Guard to be there. Had the Guard been there, I don't think you would have had this level of violence.
Right.
It would have actually saved
Right.
lives.
Yeah. The, uh, you know, I- when I think back at that day, I try to remember, or I- I'm wondering what really started it. Do you think that that was like a government entity encouraging, like riling people up to, or do you know what actually caused people to breach the Capitol?
We have intelligence that there were plans for this to happen by extremist groups, right? These are not
Okay.
your rank and file conservative groups that were involved that we'd all be familiar with. These are truly extremist groups that are more anarchist, and some were on the
Uh-huh.
left and some were on the right. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, my opinion is some of those go so far to the right, they loop back around and they're really aligned with the left. Um,
Yeah.
we're still investigating what involvement any
Mhm.
government entity may have. We haven't found any solid evidence yet, other
Yeah.
than the willingness, let me just say the willingness to allow it to play out. I think I
Okay.
think I think we can have enough evidence to make that case, but we're
Yeah.
still digging deeper. And the nice thing about it, now that we have the Trump administration, they're cooperating, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, the agencies are cooperating with us. You still have some, I would say, career people deep within some of these agencies that are obstructing, but I do have a
Yeah.
hotline with the directors and the secretaries of each of those agencies, and they're helping to get us the information we need.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to tell you about my sponsors real quick.
Sometimes I get on a roll cleaning or gardening, and I need a boost but don't have time for a meal. Big Fork Brand's pork jerky is the perfect choice to keep my momentum, offering high-protein snacks for on-the-go energy boosts. Not only do they offer pork jerky, but they also make pork sticks, bacon sausage, bacon hot dogs, and burger and hot dog sauces. Products come in a variety of delicious flavors, including Thai green curry and maple and brown sugar for the meat options, and gangster and Chicago fire for the sauces. I personally think the original flavor of the pork jerky hits just right after tackling a big chore. It's a little salty and very flavorful. My discount code gives you 20% off your entire order, and it's currently the best deal available. Just visit bigforkbrands.com and enter in my promo code JADE, that's JADE, at checkout. Are you looking for a gift for a music lover, or maybe some apparel to show off your quirky side? Old Glory has you covered. With over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture, you're guaranteed to find the perfect item. They even have seasonal gear. My husband enjoys the Beatles and Led Zeppelin apparel, and I love the Billy Idol apparel. I even found items for my fellow plant enthusiasts. This family-owned superstore is known for their quality and customer service, offers free standard shipping on all orders, and orders are shipped the same day you purchase. My discount code gives you 15% off your entire order, and it's currently the best deal available. Just visit oldglory.com and enter in my promo code JADE, that's Jade, at checkout. Looking for a game-changing way to improve your health? Zevo Life is the world's most nutrient-dense whole plant, packed with over 50% plant protein, essential amino acids, fiber, and antioxidants. Harnessing the best nature has to offer, Zevo Life nourishes your body while driving your performance, vitality, and overall well-being. Each serving is a concentrated source of clean, well-balanced nutrition designed to support modern lifestyles, and just 1 teaspoon a day supports your gut, boosts energy, and promotes healthier skin and hair. It's no wonder that it's receiving rave 5-star reviews. Step into a healthier future with a 30% discount and a 30-day risk-free guarantee by visiting zivo.life and using my promo code. To support my show and to receive 30% off your entire order, enter in my promo code JADE, that's JADE, at checkout. Another thing about this that I feel that a lot of people don't understand, Trump pardoned a lot of J6ers, and I don't think people realize that some people were imprisoned for not really doing anything. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
They were in prison for things they should not have been in prison for. If you want to make the legal argument, did some of these people break the law? Well, if they came into the Capitol when the Capitol was closed, it was a misdemeanor act of trespassing, right?
Okay.
This
Yeah.
happens all the time. There are rules that even, you can come to the Capitol tomorrow and come in. You can come into the office building. You can come to my office. It's open to the public. Of course, you've got to go through screening, right? Just like getting on an airplane, it's pretty much the same process, going through a metal detector, and the magnetometer looks at all your
Yeah.
bags. But once you're inside the building, there's certain rules that you have to follow.
Okay.
There's no protesting with inside the buildings, and no harassing of other people. Groups do that
Yeah.
all the time. They get detained by Capitol Police, and some are even arrested. Most of the time, they're let go with no charge, right?
Okay.
Occasionally, they'll get a misdemeanor charge of trespassing, and you're not allowed to come back to the Capitol for a certain amount of time or something like
Yeah.
that. What the Department of Justice did is they came down with a very, a huge hammer on everyone, even if it's just a grandma who walked into the building. Now,
Yeah.
keep this in mind. There were people who just walked in not knowing they weren't supposed to be there, because once the
Right.
Capitol was breached, the Capitol Police were overwhelmed. They could not hold
Yeah.
everybody back. So an order came down from the Capitol Police headquarters is stop trying to arrest people. Just follow them around, make sure they don't hurt anybody or break anything, right? So
Okay.
basically, a lot of Capitol Police officers were just standing at the doors with the doors open and people walking in.
Yeah.
So the rally that was happening at Trump's speech at the White House,
Uh-huh.
the Capitol was breached by about 300 people who showed up in tactical gear while that speech was going on, right? A lot of people think, oh, it's just the people got so riled up by Trump, they came down and stormed the Capitol. No,
Right.
the Capitol was breached by people wearing tactical gear who came early. By the time the
Okay.
crowd from the White House made their way down, the 3-mile walk from the White House to the Capitol,
Yeah.
it depends on the route you go. It's 1.5 to 3 miles. But by the time they got down there, the Capitol had already been breached. The Capitol Police
Right.
are just standing there with the doors open. So some people actually went in not knowing they weren't supposed to. Some of those ended up getting arrested and spending time in jail. It's because the Department of Justice convicted them or indicted them
Uh-huh.
on obstructing government. I forget the term off the top of my head, but basically is trying to stop an operation of government.
Uh-huh.
They purposely misinterpreted a law that was passed years ago that was about destroying government documents, right? and it
Okay.
was hampering a government investigation type thing. But they reinterpreted it.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has corrected that and basically said, they've overturned a lot of those convictions based on
Okay.
that. The
Yeah.
interesting thing is that there was something called the election or the Transition Integrity Project that was
Uh-huh.
devised by some legal minds on the far left about how they could stop Trump from stopping the transition of power, right? And
Uh-huh.
so a lot of the things that happened there align with how they played out or their directives of uh, like heavy-handed prosecutions. In fact, just recently, my team uncovered, with the help of the FBI, where the FBI several months earlier had done a tabletop exercise about violence at the Capitol and how one of the ways that they would handle this is heavy prosecutions, even for
Mhm.
minor instances. So a lot of that, I think, was part of their plan. But Trump has pardoned them, but the issue is they still have that conviction. They've been pardoned,
Okay.
but they still have the record. I think those can be expunged because of some other information that we have
Right.
uncovered. And a lot of that is the number of FBI agents that were actually in the Capitol that were sent, that the FBI Department of Justice had never admitted that there were that many FBI agents in the, and I'm not opposed to them being in there. They were sent to help with
Right.
crowd control, but we only recently uncovered they were there. And what's important about that is if the FBI was known to have been there, then defense attorneys could have called on them to be witnesses to witness whether or not what
Yeah.
they were charged of was actually taking place. And I know a lot of those would have said, no, uh, we were there. They did not engage in this level of violence or that type of thing. But because the
Yeah.
Department of Justice held that back, that denied uh, rights to the defendants, and some of those I believe can come back and file to have their records expunged based on that.
Okay. Yeah, that's good that that's being pursued
Yeah.
to expunge the records. Yeah. And yeah, it was recently that, or within the last few months, I think, right, that they've found out that the BBC edited that speech. And now, did other news stations play that as well to make it sound like Trump incited violence with that speech?
Well, they did more so not by editing it, but narrating. When
Okay.
they would emphasize that he said we're going to fight, right?
Yeah.
But he said go to the Capitol peacefully, right? And
Yes.
basically his
Yeah.
idea was to go there and yell, basically
Yeah.
loud enough to
Yeah.
where we would know they were out there,
Yeah.
but not to attack the Capitol. But we
Yeah.
saw a lot of that as well, as that there was the media just defended Nancy Pelosi, and we
Mhm.
uncovered, as part of my investigation, video evidence. So Pelosi had her daughter,
Yeah.
who is creating a documentary about her mom, was with her that day and filmed a lot of it. And so I just went to
Yeah.
HBO thinking, hey, we'll ask them for all their video footage. They're going to say no, and then we'll subpoena them for it. So
Yeah.
I wrote them a letter asking for it, and they just sent it to us. And one of the first videos we uncovered was Pelosi being evacuated from the Capitol, accepting responsibility for the breach. And she
Yeah.
said this was our fault. But by the time she got
Yeah.
to the secure bunker, started thinking, she realized, hey, we can use this for our political advantage, and we're going to blame Trump for it. And
Right.
and then show the world. That's why she put the fences up after everything was over with and kept them up for over a month, right? It was to show
Yeah.
what, and she said in her own words, we're going to show the world what Trump did here.
Oh, it's some people just play so dirty, and sometimes I wanna see Republicans do that back, but then it's like, "No, we have to be the better
That's
people.
right.
Don't do stuff like that."
Well,
So,
it's there's a huge disconnect in America right now, because of the
yeah.
left is pushing this anti-American agenda. Right? Is that
Yeah.
we're the world's bully? Is really what they're trying to make people think. That's why
Mhm.
I felt it was so important. Now, with our 250th anniversary, this is
Yeah.
250 years of a constitutional republic, which is far beyond anything that any historian ever expected. No country, a constitutional republic, has survived as long as we have. And so
Uh-huh.
people ask me all the time, can we continue? With
Yeah.
all the problems that we have right now, can we continue? My answer is yes, if you go back and look at what preserved us for the first 250 years. And
Yeah.
that's really what's in the book I wrote, and then they prayed, is these stories of when America, we were at our worst situation. Our back was
Mhm.
against the wall. There were overwhelming circumstances against us. The path to victory seemed impossible, but yet
Yeah.
we overcame those. And how did we do that? And it was through acts of divine providence, as our founders readily recognized. There is a scripture in the book of Ecclesiastes that even our founders referenced a lot. And it's, um, I'm going to paraphrase. It says, whatever will happen has already happened in the past. There is
Mhm.
nothing new under the sun. Now, this was written 1,000, 2,000 years before Jesus, right? So by
Right. Yeah.
then, uh, the, the scriptures are saying everything that can happen in life has already happened. That's why it's important
Yeah.
that you document it so you can go back and look at how you overcame uh, that instance in the past, or how you failed to make sure that you don't do that again. But it's already
Yeah.
happened. So if you want to avoid something happening again, go back and look into the past. And
Yeah.
that was even prevalent during the time of the Declaration of Independence. During the debates for the Declaration of Independence, you had two factions, and this is
Mhm.
kind of relative to what we've been talking about with the different party system. You had those that were for independence now, and you had a group that were, for independence, but now's not the right time. And those two
Yeah.
parties came to head with John Adams, who was liberty now and liberty forever mindset.
Yeah.
And you had John Dickinson, who was from Pennsylvania, who was an ardent patriot, but he was a realist. And he had
Okay.
studied what happened to all societies that stood up against Great Britain. Okay. And
Okay.
he knew the power is the most powerful military force in the history of the world. There is no way we could defeat them on the field of battle. It had never happened.
Mhm.
So during the heat of the debate, John Adams had made his speech, liberty for now, liberty forever, and he sat back down. John Dickinson gets
Yeah.
up and he makes a speech that modern historians have called the paper skiff speech. He's basically saying the Doomsday of America speech. And he defined, if we take on this battle against Great Britain, we will fare no better than a paper skiff in a raging river. We'd be destroyed.
Yeah.
At the end of that speech, Benjamin Rush, another delegate, and Benjamin Rush writes this in his journal. He said he leaned over to John Adams and asked him, said, "Do you believe that we can be successful in our war with Great Britain, our war for independence?" And he
Yeah.
said that John Adams leaned over to him and said, "Yes, if we pray and ask God forgive us of our sins." What he was doing was quoting a scripture from Chronicles 7:14,
Okay.
which if my people who believe, will pray and ask for forgiveness, I'll heal their land. What John Adams was doing was looking back into the past, just like Ecclesiastes said. Go back and look
Uh-huh.
at different societies and how they responded to different challenges. And he was looking at
Yeah.
ancient Israel, who stood fast, they prayed, and God gave them their liberty. And so we see so much evidence of looking back and seeing how God divinely delivered America,
Mhm.
not just in a miraculous way. I mean, people had to make a stand, they had to fight. And so my book is it's 14 stories of providence beginning in 1746 all the way up into the 20th century, with a lot from World War II and the Civil War in there.
Okay.
That and the thing about understanding people today, you like to read, I like to read. That's not the case
Yeah.
with a lot of people. They want instant gratification, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Give me a summary on YouTube, and if it's less than 2 minutes, I'll watch it, right?
Yeah.
But the difference is if you write it in a story form. People like
Right.
stories, right? And so I knew that to have people really read this book and understand it, it needs to be written as if you were at Valley Forge with George Washington. If you
Yeah.
were in the capsule of the Apollo 8 space mission and you're there with them experiencing what's going on. But when you write in story form,
Uh,
I can't just research George Washington. You have to research
right.
those that were with him and what they saw and what they did. That's why it took a decade of research just to get the material, because
Yeah.
you're researching everyone who was around during that time period to build the story.
Yeah. Do you have a copy of your
I
book
do.
next to you?
There we go.
Perfect. Nice.
And if
Awesome.
you
Um,
we've had a lot of prominent people reading this. I mean, we've got
uh,
prominent pastors from mega churches. Michael Youssef, for those who are familiar with him,
yeah.
he's preached sermons from this book. Newt Gingrich has endorsed it. Glenn Beck had an entire
Yeah.
one of his radio shows about the book, which that in itself drove it
Okay.
to be a #1 bestseller on Amazon for several
Yeah.
weeks. But on June the 1st, President Trump asked me to come visit with him at the in the
Uh,
Oval Office. It was just a meeting with he and I and some of his staff.
yeah.
He was actually asking my advice on some things. Well, this book was going to be released on July the 4th, and this is June 1st. I
Okay.
already had a pre-release copy with me in paperback form, so I just took it with me. And
Uh,
so when I went, there's a procedure you go through going into the White House. Once you get through security, then you wait in one lobby. They take you to another lobby. You wait till the president's ready. But I was
okay.
sitting in the first lobby. They took me into the second lobby, but the door to the Oval Office was already open, and there were some people coming out. And the president saw me. He's like, "Barry, come on in. Let's get a picture."
Yeah.
So we took. It usually does pictures after a meeting. So we take picture
Okay.
behind the Resolute desk, and afterwards I hand him the book.
Uh,
And he pulls out a pen like he was going to endorse, sign it for me. I'm like, no, sir, this is for you. And I had inscribed
yeah.
on the inside of it, to my favorite president, which is an inside joke to us because unlike other presidents who go through this procedure, if they want to talk to a member of Congress, where the White House communications calls your scheduler, you set up a mutual time, and then they call the scheduler gets you on the phone. Then the White House office, the communication says, Congressman Loudermilk, the President of the United States, is now on the line, and you have your
Uh,
conversation. The way it works with President Trump is your cell phone rings at any time of the day or night, and it's like, Barry, it's your favorite president. So I just inscribed to my favorite president, which he liked, and I put in there
yeah.
to someone who has also experienced an act of divine providence. When he read that, he
Mhm.
turned to me, he pointed to his right ear, and he said, if God had not told me to move at that moment, I wouldn't be here today. And he's talking about the
Yeah.
assassination attempt against him in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. So I left thinking, I got a copy. We got a picture of him holding it, sitting at the Resolute
Yeah.
desk. Of course, I
Yeah.
send that to my son and his wife. They do all of our marketing, so they can use that.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
I don't think any more about it until I'm at the White House 2 weeks later on some other business. I'm not meeting with the president, but one
Mhm.
of the staff members who was in the meeting with me comes to me and says, that book you gave the president? I said, yeah. He said, he's been reading it. I'm like, really? He said, yeah, he kept it on his desk for 2 weeks. Uh,
Yeah.
about a month later, he sends out a Truth Social endorsing the book. And so on the front cover at the bottom is an endorsement statement by President Donald Trump. Of course, we
Nice.
had to go back and get them all reprinted because,
Of
um,
course. Yeah.
you do, if the president endorses your book, which he does very few, especially unsolicited like that. And he's
Yeah.
made reference to it
Yeah.
before that it really had an impact on him. And
Yeah.
that's what we want with the book is to people understand that most everything that we've ever faced before or facing
Yeah.
now, we faced before and we can overcome it.
Yeah.
But you have to be founded on something. And our founders
Yeah.
were based on uh, concept of morality, freedom, and faith. And when
Mhm.
any of those were challenged, we stood up as a country. One of my favorite stories in there is one that my dad was somewhat involved with. If you don't mind, I'll share a little bit of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
This was in World War II. He was a medic in the
Uh-huh.
Army, landed at D-Day, uh, went through Normandy, France, and ended up in Holland just near the end of the
Uh-huh.
war. And this is December of 1945, or 1944. Everyone
Mhm.
thought the war was over. We had driven the Germans back across the Siegfried line. They were in Germany. We had pretty much decimated them. We knew that, in fact, my dad had said they were just all planning on being home by Christmas time. But Hitler
Okay.
wasn't quite done. He amassed basically everything he had in the midst of blizzards that were going on in Germany and in the Ardennes forest, in Holland, in Belgium. It was
Yeah.
immoderate rains, as Patton called them, as he was in France at the time, and
Mhm.
basically stalled any battle. Hitler used that as cover, and he amassed his force on the Siegfried line and came across mid-December in what was known as the Battle of the Bulge, and he just decimated the American and
Yeah.
Canadian and British lines that we had there. And there was a mass retreat trying to get back to safety by most Americans that hadn't been killed or captured by then. But
Mhm.
some documents were captured, and Eisenhower knew that the objective of the Germans were to take two towns, one of St. Vith and the other of Bastogne.
Uh-huh.
The 101st Airborne was sent to Bastogne with the orders to hold the town at all cost. General Anthony McAuliffe was the acting commander. The thing is, 101st Airborne were on a rest and relaxation, being refitted after some other battles, and
Okay.
they were not ready yet, but they had to go anyhow.
Yeah.
So they basically took their rifles, a few bazookas with them, and they didn't even have winter clothing that was adequate. But they went to the town of Bastogne, secured it,
Uh-huh.
but there was a standoff between the 101st Airborne and an overwhelming German force of artillery and tanks. And I mean, they were doing a valiant job of just holding town, but
Oh,
it was obvious they couldn't
yeah.
hold very long. Patton was ordered to go relieve Bastogne, but it was clear he wasn't going to get there in time. However, 2 weeks
Yeah.
earlier, George Patton had called his chaplain in his office and asked him if there was an official army prayer for good weather for battle.
Yeah.
And the chaplain came back and said, "No, there isn't." And Patton said, "Well, I want you to write one." So
Yeah.
Patton then goes through this monologue about the power of prayer and how important it is. And people don't think of Patton as, this great evangelist, but he goes
Yeah.
through how important it is for prayer. He says it's like plugging into a circuit of power. But the one
Yeah.
thing that he said in there, and this is where I got the title of the book, is he said there's three
Okay.
things that's in place to achieve anything. He says there's planning, there's working. He said planning is what we do when we plan a military objective. We plan
Uh-huh.
for it, right? Working is the training and then the execution of that battle plan. But the
Yeah.
third thing is what stands in the way of defeat or victory. And he said that third thing is prayer.
Yeah.
And so it's planning, working, and prayer. And so we took that. As I looked at that, I'm like, this is consistent throughout the history of America. Our founders and our heroes through history, they planned, they worked, and then they prayed. And
Mhm.
Patton said that is what makes the difference between victory and defeat, is that third element of prayer. So in that story,
Yeah.
Bastogne ends up being surrounded, and the Germans quit firing at one point, and they sent a surrender ultimatum
Yeah.
over to the Americans. The chief of staff of General McAuliffe uh, carries the surrender ultimatum into the general's office, and he says, "Sir, we have a surrender ultimatum from the Germans."
Uh-huh.
And he said that General McAuliffe just looked up and he said, "Well, tell them we'll accept their surrender." And
Yeah.
he was kind of astonished. He said, "No, sir, they're demanding we surrender." Now you think about it here, General McAuliffe knows they're surrounded, knows they're outgunned, they're
Yeah.
outmanned. Because of the
Yeah.
blizzards, we couldn't even get supplies in. We couldn't even get aircraft in. There
Yeah.
was no hope. I mean, their circumstances were overwhelming. And so you think, is he making light on it? But according to the chief of staff, he said he realized that the general was serious. That if you're asking for
Yeah.
surrender, it has to be them surrendering, because his orders were to hold the town at all costs, which means surrender was not in his vocabulary.
Mhm.
So he says, to the, when the chief of staff says, no, they're demanding we surrender, he says, we surrender? Nuts. So on the surrender ultimatum, that's what General McAuliffe writes is nuts. And
Really?
right. And he hands it to the chief of staff, or executive officer, as they call him. I'm using a
Uh-huh.
political term, but the executive officer takes it to the German captain who brought it, who had been blindfolded in the command post.
Uh-huh.
So they take it to him and takes the blindfold off, and he looks at it, and he's confused by this unique American saying, and he says, "Is this in the positive or the negative?" And the chief of
Yeah.
staff tells him, or the executive officer says, "It's defiantly negative." And his response is, "Many American soldiers and innocent civilians will die today due to your arrogance." And his response
Yeah.
was, "If you try to take this town, we'll kill every German that comes across this line." But still, I mean, their
Huh.
circumstances are overwhelming.
Right.
What happened though, the Patton's conversation with Chaplin was 2 weeks earlier. So he
Yeah.
told Patton, Patton told his chaplain, he said, "I want you to go and have 250,000 cards, about the size of a business card, cards made
Yeah.
up with the prayer on it and a Christmas message
Okay.
on the other side. But I want that prayer for good weather for battle distributed to every person in the Third Army." So they printed those cards. Those
Uh-huh.
cards arrived for every soldier in the Third Army while
Yeah.
they were on their way to Bastogne, and the skies miraculously cleared. The Air Corps came
Wow.
in, drove the Germans back, and a few weeks later, as Patton was going into Germany, his chaplain caught up with him, and Patton went to him and he said, "Father, our prayers worked, didn't they?" So he was acknowledging that the prayer was
Yeah.
the difference there. And so it's stories like this in the book
Yeah.
from all over throughout American
Yeah.
history, from the 1700s all the way up into the 20th century.
Yeah, I think that sounds so interesting. I'm definitely going to message for a copy of the book.
All right.
And where can the audience find it?
So it's on Amazon. It's at most of the major retailers. You can go to the website, which is andthentheyprayed.com,
Okay.
or you can go to my website, barryloudermilk.com.
Perfect.
Or you can just go to Amazon and plug in "And Then They Prayed" or my name, and it'll pop up. We have it in hardcover, special 250th anniversary hardcover, paperback,
Oh,
as
perfect.
well as ebook form.
Awesome. Sounds good. I will include all of the links in the show notes and help promote it.
All right.
So, all right. I want to thank you for being here today.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Well,
All
thank you. I've
right.
enjoyed it. Maybe we could do it again sometime.
Oh, definitely. I'd love to.